Good morning, I'm Dave Christie with your LaRouche Organization Daily Update for Thursday, February 12th. I'll hit on some of the matters regarding new starts and supposed negotiations underway there, as well as the Iran situation in light of the meeting between Netanyahu and Trump, as well as what occurred in the Congress yesterday with Pam Bondi, Attorney General Pam Bondi's testimony in front of Congress regarding the Epstein affair. My opinion, quite a train wreck on her part, but let me just say that Harley Schlanger will be crashing today on finishing an article, part of the sort of the third part of his series that he has. And in this part, he will go through Epstein's connection to the British establishment, British intelligence, the monarchy, some of what we've seen in terms of the explosive elements coming out and really a major shakeup in the United Kingdom political situation there. I just briefly, Harley Schlanger also just did an interview or a discussion with Garland Nixon, a investigative reporter and very important voice within the alternative media landscape. So I'm sure that'll be posted relatively soon. And then may I simply point to the very high-level discussion between Helga Zepp-LaRouche of the Schiller Institute and Ray McGovern, a former CIA analyst, one of the founding members of the Veteran Intelligence Professionals for Sanity. But they did a dialogue yesterday that you can find on the LaRouche Organization site. I'll come to some of those matters discussed by them later. But in terms of where an evaluation of the current global crisis, there is a lot of moving parts to this, some of which are extremely contradictory. Frankly, you could get dizzy trying to evaluate the situation based on past experience or whatever axioms you may hold within the old dying system, because what's clear is that a new system is developing, and in that you're going to get the kind of turbulence that we're seeing at the strategic level. What Sergei Lavrov described as an upheaval. And yesterday, Russian Foreign Minister Lavrov gave a speech to the Russian State Duma, and I just cite one of his statements where he said that the world has entered an era of swift and profound change. Some experts even argue an era of upheaval. One thing is clear, though, this is not a fleeting or temporary development, but a new phase in global development, perhaps even an era. And he goes on to describe that it's the fight for a more just and sustainable world, and that the old colonial system we're seeing a conflict between them. And he said that this entire struggle is gaining momentum, that is of the global majority, that's gaining momentum and is affecting almost the entire globe. So I think that's the backdrop for what we're looking at. I will just add that regarding evaluations of where we're at, Lyndon LaRouche would often discuss that when the system breaks down, what you're going to find is you go to flip on the light switch and the toilet flushes. And I think that's about where we're at in terms of trying to figure out what's happening, because if you're viewing it from the standpoint of what you expected in the past, or your axiomatic framework that was developed from the past, it doesn't function. I will just, in that context, return to what Putin said at a speech, I believe it was last year, where he referred to the idea of a diplomacy or a philosophy of complexity. He said that in this new world, the struggle around the development of the new system of the global majority, he said that in the new world, each has its own advantageous aspects and competitive strengths, referring to these nations, which in every case create a unique combination of and composition. But to understand all of this, simple laws of logic, cause and effect relationships, and the patterns arising from them are insufficient. What is needed here is a philosophy of complexity, something akin to quantum mechanics, which is wiser and in some ways more complex than classical physics. So I think that approach is how you have to look at what's going on in the world, where indeed there are many contradictory developments. And so let me cover some of them, which is in light of the disintegration or the ending of the New START Treaty, or the expiration, I should say, of the New START Treaty last week. It's not clear what the movement forward is. Certainly within the military-industrial complex, there are those that are arguing that we should now triple the deployed weapons to meet up with the combined threat of Russia and China. Some of this we've covered and you can find on EIR.news site. But according to J.D. Vance, he says that there's actually negotiations with the Russians ongoing. And so in terms of referring to the New START and so on and nuclear non-proliferation talks, he said that it's going to change compared to where it was, and that's part of the negotiation that we're engaging in with the Russians. He didn't provide what sort of details that there are going on with the Russians, assuming there are some. He did refer to that there are more regimes across the world getting nuclear weapons, which is the worst thing that can happen. Now, obviously, if the United States continues to amp up its military nuclear weapons arsenal, that's not going to do much for the proliferation issues. We have, of course, the well-known cases of those that either admit or are assumed to have nuclear weapons beyond the permanent five of the Security Council. North Korea, we have India, Pakistan, others. Israel is assumed, of course, to have one, as well as recent statements coming from the Iranians and so on that at least a military commander there, that the Saudis may have them too. Anyway, now I think just to note that at least within the present New START, something that Ray McGovern raised in the discussion with Helga Tsepp-LaRouche yesterday, is he said, look, from the Russian standpoint, they made this simple offer to Trump, which he did not accept, that is to extend the New START arrangements for at least a year under the present, just continue it as is until something could be negotiated, perhaps better or more competent to deal with the fact that the New START expired. But anyway, what McGovern made the point yesterday is that in that context, if Trump couldn't at least do that, then the Russians may have to conclude that either he's not his own man, or that he's controlled, or perhaps worse, that he is intent on escalating the situation. So that's at least regarding New START. Now, on the situation in Iran, we did have the meeting between Trump and Netanyahu. Not a lot known in terms of what was discussed there. What Trump did say on Truth Social is that it was a very good meeting. The tremendous relationship between the two countries continues. He then said, there was nothing definitive reached other than I insisted that negotiations with Iran continue to see whether or not a deal can be consummated. If it can, I let the Prime Minister, Benjamin Netanyahu, know that that will be a preference. If it cannot, we will just have to see what the outcome will be. And of course, then he goes on to say, last time, we hit him with the midnight hammer and so on and so forth. So according, at least the statement from Netanyahu's office regarding the discussions he had with Trump, the Times of Israel described as relatively terse, saying that the two sides addressed negotiations with Iran, Gaza, and regional developments. Excuse me. Again, not much said from Netanyahu. It was certainly not the bubbling, Trump's with us, we're going to destroy Iran and so on. So We don't know what was said behind the scenes. From the Iranian side, it should be noted that Ali Larijani in an interview that he did with the Qatar-based Al Jazeera, said that the U.S. has moved towards a rational path by engaging in negotiations. He went on to say that in his view, Washington has concluded that a different approach to Iran, other than the military option, must be pursued. However, he went on to say that, even though there may be no solution but a diplomatic solution, we still do not have full trust in the Americans. We were in the middle of negotiations last June when they decided to attack us. That was a very bad experience for us. And otherwise made it clear that if diplomacy does collapse, that Iran is ready militarily. So, again, very unclear what's going on. Part of this kind of turbulence that we're seeing in this moment of upheaval, as Lavrov noted. On the other hand, whether, Araghchi may be saying that negotiations are underway and he thinks that the U.S. is maybe not interested in a military option. U.S. Treasury Secretary Scott Bessent said that the president, Trump, and Secretary of War, Pete Hegseth, are moving military assets towards Iran, and they're going to have some decisions to make. And the Wall Street Journal similarly reports that as these assets move to Iran, Trump may not have made his decision yet, but that these are underway. The Armada is on its way, this kind of business. So certainly Bessent's statement should be considered, given that he, basically admitted that the economic warfare waged on Iran to try to get the color revolution started there by collapsing the Iranian currency, that was the first phase of what he described economic statecraft, anyway, that was what precipitated the forces of the MI6 and Mossad and CIA, whatever intelligence services there were operating, to then pull out the Islamic ISIS-style jihadis that then caused the chaos and resulted in the present narrative that the Iranian crackdown on the protesters led to 50,000 dead and so on and so forth. So anyway, that's from Bessent saying that the assets are on the way. Now, I'm just going to end with, at least in terms of an update, on Pam Bondi's performance yesterday in the Congress. I would probably characterize it by those pundits suggesting that what she did yesterday is going to result in the expected blue wave in the midterms this November. It was I didn't watch the whole testimony, but certainly the clips that I saw were embarrassing on her part. She, like many others in the hearings, kept it at an extremely highly partisan level, which one might expect in the current political scene. The only one that took it out of the highly partisan level, in my view, was Thomas Massie. And I think importantly, when he brought up certain aspects of Bondi's failure around the redactions. At one point, he brought up some of the redacted materials that are available on what the Department of Justice has released. But because of his being a member of Congress, he was able to see what wasn't redacted, or the unredacted versions, noting that in addition to, he identified there were 6 different people who were identified by the FBI as co-conspirators of Epstein. However, in the redacted version, he particularly referenced the name of Les Wexner, saying that Les Wexner's name was not available in the redacted version, but was available in the version that he saw. So anyway, you can see those that clip, but the point is in the back and forth and the debate that he was having with Bondi, she accused him of not doing anything that under Biden and so forth. And then he says, well, I'm glad you asked about Merrick Garland, that is Biden's attorney general. He said, because this is bigger than Watergate. This goes over 4 administrations. You don't have to go back to Biden. Let's go back to Obama. Let's go back to George Bush. This cover-up spans decade. And then simply noted that she's playing the part in the present cover-up of this. So I think that's important, and just goes to the point that this indeed has been a long-term operation, and as Harley Schlanger will undoubtedly lay out, Epstein's connection to the British intelligence and the British establishment gives the fuller picture of what this was about. Epstein was just simply part of a cog in the wheel of what Dmitriev has, well, others within the Russian system have referred to as a satanic system. Dmitriev, a week and a half ago, he actually said that Trump and Putin were together. He said, are we now clear on the satanic, well-connected and ubiquitous Epstein cabal that that President Putin and President Trump are fighting? Referring to the vampire ball that is now ending and so on. Bondi certainly didn't give much indication that Trump is fighting this, if she's indeed representing his view. But anyway, you get the point that this is a long time project. Epstein was just simply a cog in the wheel for the British system. And what is needed at this point to deal with this, because this has unveiled the way in which this oligarchical system functions in terms of its, the corruption of the soul, ultimately, of the participants in their system, the operatives of their system, that what's ultimately needed, and I'll just refer to, and this is something that was taken up by Helga Zepp-LaRouche and Ray McGovern yesterday, but I'm going to read from the invitation to an emergency Zoom conference of the Movement of World Citizens that will take place on March 2nd, something that you should sign up to be involved in. What it says is, the absolute pit of human depravity of the Epstein affair is a wake-up call for the entire human species. We must absolutely reverse course and reject this bestial behavior and all the cultural influences which allowed it to become a reality over the recent decades. We have to turn to the best cultural traditions of all nations and civilizations, to the highest expressions of all the universal history, and revive them in an active dialogue of cultures, in order to initiate the most beautiful renaissance of classical culture. Only in this way can we uphold a noble image of man as being the only species gifted with creative reason. And it's ultimately that approach which is how we're going to deal with this. It's not simply exposés and, this is how evil these people are, but it's to say we reject that. We're organizing a new system based on the best of the principles of the Renaissance, which ultimately was what the American Revolution was based upon. And ultimately, those are the same principles upon which the global majority is operating right now in their rejection of the British imperial system and seeking to create a new system. And that is what we should be engaged with. And that is what, we are doing at the LaRouche organization. So stay tuned to your updates. And as I mentioned, you can get some of the discussions with Harley and Garland Nixon, and as well with Helga Zepp-LaRouche and Ray McGovern. So find those on the LaRouche organization site and stay tuned for your updates.